Driebelbis Cave Incident. On Saturday evening, October 1, 1983, 6 experienced cave explorers entered Driebelbis Cave near Kutztown, Pennsylvania. These were seasoned spelunkers who knew the underground world intimately. For hours, they navigated underground passages, making their way deeper into the earth. Around 2 a.m., the group decided to head back to the surface. Robert E. Scott, 36 years old, was bringing up the rear of the group. Scott found himself about 75 feet from the cave entrance in a vertical crevice. The passage was a narrow slot stretching 80 feet high and generally 12 inches wide, but the crevice narrowed to only 7 to 8 inches in its middle section. As Scott maneuvered through this tight section, his hand slipped on wet rock. Without warning, his body dropped down into the narrowest part of the crevice. Scott found himself wedged tightly on his left side between rock walls. Every surface was rounded and slick with mud, with nothing to grab onto. Scott's companions quickly discovered his predicament when they lost contact with him. No matter what they tried, they couldn't get Scott free from the crevice. After 8 grueling hours of failed attempts, they left to get outside help. At 9:30 a.m. per Sunday morning, volunteers from 4 fire departments arrived. The complexity became apparent as Scott was wedged deep underground. Authorities contacted the National Cave Rescue Commission for specialized help. By Sunday afternoon, 14 highly trained cave rescue specialists flew in from Pittsburgh. When the team first contacted Scott, he was in good spirits and alert. But as Sunday wore on, Scott's demeanor began to change dramatically. The psychological pressure of being trapped began taking its toll. Scott became increasingly irrational and abusive toward his rescuers. The rescue team learned that Scott was epileptic, adding medical complexity. Twice during the rescue, he was given medication to prevent seizures. Rescuers strung a high line above Scott and placed slings around his body. Every time they made progress, Scott would begin thrashing wildly. His violent movements defeated any progress and worsened his situation. The rescue team established monitoring equipment to track his vital signs. Keeping him warm became critical as cave temperatures can cause hypothermia. They used heat packs, high-intensity lights, and hair dryers for warmth. Despite being trapped, Scott was able to eat and drink throughout the ordeal, but Scott's erratic behavior became the biggest obstacle to his rescue. He screamed abuse at the very people risking their lives to save him. The medical team recognized that sedation might be key to successful rescue. However, doctors refused to authorize the use of tranquilizers or sedatives. Technical rescue efforts continued with inflatable airbags, grease, and plastic sheeting. The crevice seemed designed to prevent exactly what they were trying to accomplish. As Monday morning approached, Scott had been trapped for over 24 hours. Around 7 a.m. Monday, as Scott delivered another tantrum, disaster struck. His vital signs suddenly ceased and the monitoring equipment went flat. Scott lost consciousness after his body succumbed to incredible stress. The rescue team immediately began emergency medical procedures. After 29 hours underground, Robert Scott's body had reached its limits. With Scott unconscious, they used painful extraction methods to drag him upward. At 12:25 p.m. Monday, Scott was finally freed after over 30 hours trapped. But shortly after extraction, Robert E. Scott was pronounced dead. Talucah Cave Incident. On June 29, 2005, students and instructors gathered at Talucah Cave in Alabama for a training exercise. They were part of the National Cave Rescue Commission's summer seminar. Their mission was to practice rescuing an injured person from a 35-foot vertical drop. The group descended into Talucah Cave through the main entrance. After 20 minutes through twisting passages, they reached a larger chamber. Finally, they reached the skylight room with a vertical pit. This would be their training ground to practice hauling an injured person up. Tim Lawn, 41 years old, volunteered to serve as the pretend patient. His background in rope systems made him perfect for the role. The next hour was spent carefully preparing the rope system. Students assembled complex rigging using climbing ropes under instructor supervision. They installed anchors in solid rock and tested every connection. 2 students were designated as edge attendants to guide the rope. Every piece of equipment was inspected twice for safety. Lawn put on his harness, connected his device, and clipped into the line. Lawn began his descent over the lip of the pit as planned. The lowering operation proceeded with textbook precision. Every few feet, Lawn called out his status to those above. The team reconfigured their rope system to haul Lawn back up. The hauling command echoed and the team began pulling together. One edge attendant called out that Lawn was 15 feet up from the bottom. Everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. Then disaster struck without any warning. A sharp crack echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. Several chunks of limestone broke free from the lip above. The rocks began their deadly plunge toward Lawn suspended below. Lawn raised his left arm to protect his head instinctively. The first limestone chunk struck his forearm with sickening impact. The force spun him like a pendulum in the narrow pit. A second bigger rock struck him squarely in the lower back. The force drove the air from his lungs audibly. The chamber erupted into panic as training became real rescue. The team immediately reversed the rope system to lower Lawn down. They could hear Lawn groaning in pain from the impacts below. A weak response confirmed he was conscious but badly hurt. When Lawn reached the bottom, instructors prepared for medical assessment. The assessment revealed severe bruising to his arm and lower back trauma. They decided to evacuate Lawn through a horizontal entrance 300 yards away. This avoided the dangerous vertical pit with loose rock threatening above. After 45 minutes, they emerged to waiting meeting paramedics outside. An ambulance transported Lon to the nearest emergency hospital. Paradise Springs Cave Incident. In September 1996, 2 recreational divers went to Paradise Springs in Marion County, Florida. These weren't professional cave divers, but open water divers with only basic scuba certification. Open water divers are trained for oceans or lakes where you can swim directly to the surface. Cave diving is completely different and requires specialized training and equipment. The 2 divers made their first critical error before entering the water. They decided to explore the underwater cave without a guideline. In cave diving, a guideline is a rope that leads back to the entrance. Without a guideline, you can become lost in an underwater maze with no way out. But these 2 divers didn't understand this fundamental safety principle. They entered Paradise Springs without any form of navigation aid. They relied only on their ability to remember the route back. The divers descended into the cave system, going deeper and deeper. They reached a depth of 148 feet, far inside the cave system. They were far from any natural light and completely dependent on artificial lighting. At 148 feet deep, they were in one of the most dangerous environments imaginable. Then disaster struck in the form of a silt-out. Silt-outs occur when sediment on the cave floor gets stirred up by movements. This creates a cloud of particles that reduces visibility to absolute zero. The 2 divers caused a massive silt-out at 148 feet deep. The clear water was suddenly replaced by thick silt, making navigation impossible. In zero visibility, the male diver became separated from his partner. Losing contact with your dive buddy in darkness is a nightmare scenario. The male diver began searching frantically for a way out without a guideline. He was essentially swimming blind through an underground maze. In his desperate search, the diver made a fatal error. He attempted to squeeze through what he thought was a passage out. Instead, he wedged himself into a small crack in the cave wall. Once stuck in this tight space, he couldn't move forward or backward. He was 148 feet underwater in complete darkness, trapped in a rock crevice. Meanwhile, his diving partner saw him disappear into the silt cloud. She witnessed what appeared to be a cave collapse. She believed her partner was crushed and made the decision to surface for help. When emergency responders arrived about an hour later, they organized a cave rescue. Professional cave diving rescue teams entered following proper protocols. They laid guidelines behind them and worked to locate the missing diver. The rescue team found the trapped diver wedged in a small crevice. However, their initial attempts to extract him were unsuccessful. They called in the specialized NSS Cave Diving Section Recovery Team. When this elite team investigated, they discovered what had actually happened. The cave had not collapsed as the female diver believed. The trapped diver, probably running low on air, convinced himself he couldn't get free. In absolute panic, he released his diving harness and backed out of the crevice. He then began a free ascent, swimming toward the surface, holding his breath. A free ascent from 148 feet without equipment is extremely dangerous. The tragic irony is that by releasing his harness, he had actually freed himself. If he had remained calm and waited, rescue teams might have extracted him. But panic drove him to make decisions that turned survival into death. King and Queen Blair Cave Incident. On New Year's Eve in the year 2000, a man and woman arrived at King Blair and Queen Blair Caves in Indiana. It was almost midnight, and they had been drinking a lot of alcohol. Their speech was slurred and they could barely walk straight. A local resident saw them and warned them not to go into the cave while drunk. The resident knew the caves were dangerous and the couple was too drunk to be safe. But the intoxicated couple ignored the warnings and decided to explore anyway. Luckily, they met another group of experienced cave explorers at Queen Blair Cave. The experienced group felt sorry for them and let them join their expedition. The experienced cavers thought they could keep the drunk couple safe. At first, everyone explored the limestone passages of Queen Blair Cave together. The experienced spelunkers followed the normal routes through the underground system. But the drunk couple had trouble walking on the uneven cave surfaces. They couldn't understand directions or remember where they had been. Alcohol made it very hard for them to think clearly or navigate. Cave systems have many branching passages that look similar and can confuse people. Even sober, experienced explorers can get lost in the maze-like tunnels. For the drunk couple, remembering the route was almost impossible. As the group went deeper into the cave, the experienced cavers decided to leave. They had reached their planned turnaround time and started heading back to the surface. But somewhere in the complex passages, the drunk couple got separated from their guides. They were confused about directions and couldn't keep up with the group. The experienced group finished their exit without realizing the couple was missing. Cave groups often spread out during exploration, so they didn't notice right away. By the time the experienced group reached the surface, the couple was already lost. Deep inside Queen Blair Cave, the drunk couple realized they were in serious trouble. Their impaired navigation skills made it impossible to find the way out. Hours passed as they wandered through passages trying to find the exit. Their flashlights flashlights gradually dimmed as the batteries drained away. The couple had brought vodka with them and kept drinking in the cave. Instead of thinking clearly to solve their problem, they made it worse by drinking more. When their water ran low, they drank water from the cave. Cave water can contain harmful bacteria and chemicals that make people sick. As their situation got worse, they made an even more dangerous decision. They started burning their clothes to create warmth and light. Fire in caves uses up oxygen and creates deadly poisonous gases. The burning clothes filled the cave with toxic smoke that could kill them. The smoke made it hard to see and breathe in the cave passages. Back at the surface, local residents became worried when they saw the couple's truck. It was noon on New Year's Day and the truck had been there for 12 hours. Cave rescue teams quickly assembled to search Queen Blair Cave for the missing couple. The specialized rescue team spread out through the maze-like tunnels. One rescue team heard muffled voices and coughing sounds from a passage below. They could smell burning clothing, which told them someone was down there. The rescuers called out and heard weak responses from the drunk couple. When they found the couple, they were severely dehydrated and almost out of vodka. Their lighting systems were nearly dead, and they were surrounded by toxic smoke. The couple had nearly killed themselves by burning clothes in the confined space. The rescue team brought them safely to the surface. Duffield Cave Incident. On August 15, 2015, teenagers from Camp Wilderness went to explore Duffield Cave. Emma Jeffrey was 17 years old and one of the most experienced cavers in the group. Their youth group leader, Mr. Peterson, led them into the dark limestone cave. The first hour went well as they crawled through wide passages and large chambers. Then they reached a very difficult passage that local cavers called the pretzel. The pretzel was named this because it twisted and turned through the rock like a giant pretzel. The passage forced explorers to bend their bodies in almost impossible ways. It started as a low crawl, then curved up, twisted left, dropped down, bent right, and angled up again. Most of the group decided the pretzel looked too scary and turned back. But Emma had conquered difficult cave passages before and wanted to try it. She studied the twisted route and mapped it in her mind before entering. Emma entered head first, army crawling through the initial narrow section. Her headlamp showed smooth limestone walls that were just wide enough for her shoulders. The first upward turn went okay as she twisted her body and pushed with her feet. The left turn was harder as she had to rotate her entire body like a corkscrew. Her right shoulder pressed against one wall while her left hip touched the other. The downward section felt like sliding into a mail slot as the space got tighter. Her chest was compressed against the floor and her breathing became shallow. But the right turn was where everything went horribly wrong. Emma's body had twisted through all the previous sections perfectly until this moment. As she tried to make the right turn, her body simply ran out of room to move. Her right shoulder jammed against one wall and her left hip wedged against the other. Her legs couldn't find any way to push forward or pull backward. The limestone passage had become like a straitjacket holding her in place. Panic hit Emma as she realized she couldn't move in any direction. Every attempt to shift position only wedged her tighter into the twisted passage. Her heart pounded and her breathing became rapid and shallow. She tried to call for help, but her compressed chest could only make weak sounds. Finally, one of her friends noticed she hadn't come out of the passage. They called her name and realized Emma was trapped inside the pretzel. For the next 4 hours, her friends tried everything to rescue her. They pulled on her feet, but the twisted passage prevented straight line pulling. They pushed from behind, but this only made her more stuck. Someone brought water to pour around her body to make it slippery, but the limestone absorbed the water and Emma became dangerously cold. Hypothermia began setting in as her body temperature dropped. She started shivering uncontrollably, which made the tight space feel worse. Her thinking became confused and she began talking to the cave walls. Above ground, emergency vehicles arrived with police, firefighters, and paramedics, but none of the responders had experience with cave rescue. They sent their smallest firefighters into the cave, but they couldn't reach Emma. As the sun set, someone called experienced cave rescuers from the area. These expert cavers knew how to move through impossibly small spaces. The smallest rescuer reached Emma and analyzed the entire situation. The solution was simple but embarrassing. Emma's wet clothing was making her bigger. In the tight pretzel passage, even a half-inch difference meant the difference between freedom and imprisonment. The rescuers carefully removed most of Emma's clothing. They applied cooking oil to her skin to make it slippery against the rock. The extraction took another hour of careful, coordinated work. They had to support Emma's weight while guiding her through each twist. When Emma finally emerged, she was barely conscious from hypothermia and exhaustion. Paramedics wrapped her in warming blankets and gave her IV fluids. Emma spent 2 days in the hospital recovering from the ordeal. Maryland Mine Cave Incident. On May 25, 2003, Travis McKellis and his family were exploring an old abandoned mine in Idaho. Travis was 25 years old and an experienced climber who knew how to use ropes safely. While they were looking around the Maryland mine site, their dog ran ahead of the group. The curious dog fell into a deep mine shaft that was 125 feet deep. The family couldn't see or rescue their dog that day, so they went home. Travis decided to come back the next day with proper climbing equipment to save the dog. On May 26th, Travis returned to the mine with his family to attempt the rescue. He set up his ropes carefully using his years of climbing experience. His anchor points were solid and his equipment was properly arranged. Travis's family stayed at the surface to talk to him during his descent. The mine shaft was 125 feet deep, so they would lose sight of him quickly. Voice communication was their only way to stay in contact with Travis. Travis started rappelling down the shaft walls in a controlled descent. Everything seemed to be going according to plan at first. But abandoned mine shafts can have invisible, deadly dangers. Over many years, dangerous gases had settled in the bottom of the shaft. These heavy gases had pushed out all the oxygen that people need to breathe. The deeper Travis went down, the more dangerous the air became. Halfway down the shaft, Travis started feeling that something was wrong. His breathing became difficult and his head felt light and dizzy. "The air is getting thin," Travis called up to his family with concern in his voice. As he continued going down, the lack of oxygen began affecting his brain. Oxygen starvation makes people lose consciousness before they realize the danger. Travis's experienced climbing mind started shutting down from lack of oxygen. At the bottom of the shaft, Travis found a sloping passage leading away. He crawled into the narrow passage on his knees looking for his dog. But his brain wasn't working properly because of the bad air. He didn't realize he was walking into a deadly trap. The sloping passage had even less oxygen than the main shaft. Travis lost consciousness within moments of entering the passage. His body struggled against oxygen starvation but couldn't survive. The lack of oxygen shut down his brain and basic life functions. His family above called frantically but got no response from Travis. The rope hung motionless and they realized something terrible had happened. They couldn't help Travis without entering the same dangerous environment. The family called professional search and rescue teams for help. The rescue teams knew they needed special breathing equipment to enter safely. A professional rescuer with an air pack was lowered into the shaft. The air pack gave the rescuer clean air independent of the deadly shaft atmosphere. At the bottom, the rescuer found Travis's body in the confined space. Travis had died from hypoxia, which means death from a lack of oxygen. There were no signs of injuries or equipment failure, just oxygen starvation. The recovery team carefully brought Travis's body up the 125-foot shaft. His family was devastated by losing both their dog and Travis.